Hey friends, I felt like it was a good time to do a bit of a personal update and share some things that I've been thinking about with regard to why Cassidy and I do this work in the first place, why we garden the way that we do, why we even want to share our journey and the small amount of knowledge that we have on these topics with you all. Because the truth is, there's a lot of work that goes into kind of figuring this stuff out, doing the research, organizing the material, and preparing it in such a way that is coherent. So I can understand even just the question, why go through all the effort to do all of this stuff that we do? So that's what this video is going to be about. I don't know how many of those of you who are subscribed to this channel will actually see this, but I appreciate you regardless, because as of preparing for this video, we are just on the cusp of hitting 10,000 subscribers, which is quite a substantial milestone for us. We've worked really hard to grow this channel, get this information and these incredible techniques out into the world, and we have tried to do this to the best of our ability. Most of the space so far on this channel has been devoted to the highly practical side of gardening naturally. So if you're a regular on this channel or if you're new here, I'm Taylor, and I appreciate you joining me as I share about why I garden naturally. There are certain experiences where when you come face to face with them, they sort of put your life in perspective. Like, you suddenly realize that you have very little control over other people, or maybe even yourself, and what happens to you. Or, you all of a sudden realize how small you are and how much of a blip your life is on the map of history. Sometimes these moments can lead to extreme negative overwhelm or personal crisis, but other times there's a feeling of extreme gratitude and awe that come from these moments. And for me, I've found that most of these experiences come when I am observing or engaging with the natural world. And maybe you can relate. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Western Washington state. And if you've never been there, it's hard to describe the incredible natural beauty, because it rains so much and it creates this multi-layered shade of green that's so intense, and it feels like you're living in a forest almost all the time. I had a pretty insane view of the Olympic Mountains just about every week driving to school. I lived near the Salish Sea and wasn't too far from the Pacific Ocean, and despite being very used to seeing these dramatic nature scenes in my ordinary life, I have always been captivated by mountains and large bodies of water. To this day, I haven't really grown numb to it. It just fills me with awe at how beautiful this place is. And now I live on the east side of the state, which has its own expression of natural beauty. There's still so much land here that has been left undeveloped, and I really love that. When I began my journey into natural growing, I discovered a new component of this sort of wonder in response to the natural world. I can remember years ago now when I first piled up some yard waste in the backyard and woke up a few days later on a cold morning to see it lightly steaming. I had this sudden feeling of awe. I had no idea what was happening. Didn't know that there were microbes in the pile. Didn't know about carbon and nitrogen ratios. I had literally just made a pile of yard waste, and now it was hot enough to create steam on a cold October morning. It's something that is so commonplace for me now, but when I was first experiencing it, it truly blew my mind. And I can remember making another pile later on just to see if it would heat up like the previous one, and it didn't. And this made me turn to books and podcasts and YouTube so that I could find the smart folks who actually knew what was happening here. Since then, I've come to learn a lot about, balancing carbons and nitrogens in a pile, managing the moisture, keeping it aerated, all so that the microbial conditions are such that they generate heat through respiration. But my entry point was really almost completely accidental. However, since then, I've had the chance to go really deep into the weeds on natural farming and how it applies to me as a home gardener. And if you're just hearing from me for the first time, or you haven't followed too much of the stuff that we explore on this channel, natural farming refers to a way of growing plants and animals that is closely aligned with the natural world. And one of the paths that takes us down is making homemade inputs, such as compost or homemade fertilizers, from hopefully common ingredients that you either have on hand or close by. But another path that goes down is in its usage of indigenous microorganisms. So that first compost pile that I made heated up because of the microbes at work inside and throughout the materials. And I put the components together for them to do their thing purely on accident. Years later, I'm now regularly finding myself precisely inoculating specific balanced materials with microorganisms that I catch from the forest by attracting them with cooked pearl barley. There's been quite a change in my awareness of soil biology. But the thing is, even with all of the knowledge that I have now, I still feel blown away when a pile of IMO3 pizza. I was shocked the first time that it happened. The microbes that I caught from the forest suddenly became real on a level that I hadn't really fully appreciated before. Couldn't believe my eyes seeing the white hyphae infusing and covering this pile so rapidly. You know, it's undeniable that I was growing something, culturing some sort of invisible entity, and that experience is something that I find myself chasing. Even when I make it today, I feel that sense of wonder. And what's even more exciting to me is seeing that stuff integrated into my garden soil wherever I'm growing. Pulling aside some soil to plant a tomato start only to find earthworms and white fungal strands flowing through the earth is honestly an incredible and very unique experience. On this channel, I tend to go a little bit into the scientific and the technical explanations of how all this stuff works. But truthfully, a lot of that intentionality in my presentation is just so that I can better understand it myself. Helps me to learn something by teaching it. But the reality is that all of these discoveries that I've made in the world of natural gardening are first made by encountering something that I didn't immediately understand. I also by no means think that I fully understand it now. I think what is so exciting about gardening in this way is that it's just kind of magical. As with so many things in life, people have been doing this stuff and have understood it at a level that we can't fully appreciate far longer than we've been able to explain it from a modern scientific perspective. I expect that there are many more discoveries to be made and implemented in agriculture, and I kind of doubt that those are going to be developed in a formal lab. It's more likely from people like you and me who are actually doing this stuff in the real world. That's a significant reason that I love this stuff, and we've built a whole channel around it. But another equally significant reason that I garden in this way actually has to do with the food itself that we grow and the potential there. When I look back on the culture that surrounded food while I was growing up, I think I can genuinely say that it was almost what you could describe as an anti-food culture. And to be more specific on that, I'll say I grew up thinking of food as just stuff that came in packages, some of which inherently tasted good and some of which inherently was unpleasant to eat. And this was probably the most expressed in the homes of friends that I grew up with and less something that my parents modeled. But even still, looking back on the primary foods that I consumed growing up, I can say that the majority of them came prepared in some form. The concept of working with raw ingredients wasn't entirely foreign, but it also wasn't commonplace. And I get the sense when I talk with many of my friends now that they shared this lack of food culture growing up. Now, you could say that this wasn't a lack of culture, it was just how that culture expressed itself. But I actually think that it's more accurate to say there was a non-existence of culture with regard to food. And the reason for that is the main priorities were affordability, ease of preparation, and just one-dimensional flavor profiles. We bought bagel bites and mozzarella sticks from Costco because they could be microwaved and turned into lunch. We ordered pizza from Little Caesars because on Friday nights, we could get a large pepperoni for $5 at the time. I have no idea how much it costs now. And the flavor of our food needed to fit into a pretty one-dimensional profile. And I don't say this to imply that there's no place for any of these kinds of foods, but I do think that we're compromising for the sake of convenience at the expense of culture. Now that I have kids, I can see why American families would take advantage of these hyper-palatable foods so often. Kids are pretty ungrateful in the moment of most of the food that you give them that's not salty, sweet carbs. But what I can also say is that we have given our kids the chance to try a very wide range of foods from a young age, and they have palates that rival a lot of adults that I know. They scarf down olives, fish, beef, organ meats, kefir, and much more that I think would have been really hard for me to stomach at their age. I've been told that we feed our kids very well, that they're a bit spoiled, but the truth is we've made a very deliberate decision to furnish our kids' diet with foods that will nourish their bodies and their palates. I've seen our 4-year-old take a piece of imported Gruyere and sweep up runny egg yolk on his breakfast board and then top it with some flaky salt. I didn't teach him to do that. We are, though, intentional about the foods that we feed them. I've always enjoyed cooking. But once Cassidy and I got married, I started kind of upping my game because it's always easier to put a little more effort in your meals when you're feeding someone other than just yourself. One of the first entry points into cooking was just watching people on YouTube make stuff and trying to replicate that. And then I stumbled upon a Bon Appetit test kitchen segment hosted by Brad Leone called It's Alive. And it was all about fermentation, and this started kind of opening a wide world for me. It was also around that time that I was gifted my first kombucha SCOBY by our good friend Annabelle. A few years later, I got the book The Art of Natural Cheesemaking by David Asher, and this really took my love of fermentation to another level. And then more recently, I read a book by Simran Sethi called Bread, Wine, Chocolate that solidified a lot of my feelings about food. And that is that in American food culture, at the very least, we've settled for a very standardized approach to food production. It's a very basic expectation that if you order a cheeseburger from a fast food restaurant in Washington State and then order the same cheeseburger from the same restaurant in Florida, it will taste the exact same. But what makes this crazy is that this is likely the only time in history that this could have been possible. We've opted for standardization in all of our food production processes when it comes to preparing food for the sake of brand consistency. And what we've lost is the concept of terroir. And this is something that I give a few pages to in my book, but in case you're not familiar with this term, terroir, it's the French word that roughly translates the sense of place. And this refers to the way that a single food is prepared from the way that it's grown, the soil it's grown in or on, the way the grower treats it as it grows, the way it's processed and handled once it's harvested, and the way that it's presented and consumed. Terroir is a way of bringing out the uniqueness of a food based on the exact conditions it was created in. It's a way of respecting the journey food takes to get to the point where it can be consumed and enjoyed. And so whereas you can buy an apple from the grocery store year-round, and they'll taste virtually the exact same every time, growing apples on site or buying them from a nearby farm and eating them fresh is a way of experiencing what that terroir has to offer. When we apply natural farming principles to the growing equation, the potential for the fullest expression of terroir rises. We're taking these indigenous microorganisms and we're reintroducing them to the soil where they're now growing in so that they can play their part, their substantial role in growing the plant itself. When we restore that natural biological diversity and abundance, we get diversity and abundance in the food we grow. And this applies to plants and animals. I really look forward to the day that I get to graze chickens and cattle on pasture that has been cultured and saturated with indigenous microbes. I want to see what these techniques lead to on a larger scale. And that's a big reason why I'm practicing this stuff even while only on my home garden scale. Now, for the last major reason why I choose to garden in this way has to do with my personal beliefs about my responsibility to this planet as a human being and as it aligns with my spiritual tradition. And to be honest, I've been hesitant to speak about this at all much because of how politicized it's become to identify with any particular religion these days, especially Christianity. There's just so many different people who will choose to interpret exactly what that means for what I believe. I don't mean to say, by the way, that I consider myself brave for divulging this now. I guess I just want to ask you to take what I say at face value and don't try to read into my meaning further than what I share here. I'm a Christian, and in fact, Cassidy and I have just recently concluded a nearly decade-long career as pastors to university-age young adults. And as I've explored the scriptures in the Bible, I've come to the conclusion that one of the primary commissions the God of the Bible gives human beings is to take care of, to steward the rest of the created order. And from the first pages of the Bible, the story being told is providing a vision for agricultural reform. The iconic task of stewarding the Garden of Eden is given to humans, the first humans, as a means of expanding the garden and its blessing across the face of the earth. As the story of the Bible continues, we see that one of the primary characters that damage is being done to is the earth itself. The soil becomes corrupted because of humanity's violence, greed, and arrogance. The God who created the earth eventually decides to allow the creation to fold in on itself and largely destroy the humans that have proliferated evil across the planet, whereas they were supposed to be ushering in the blessing. And this cleansing event of the flood is sort of a reset button for humanity's trajectory and its task to partner with the Creator in managing the creation itself. And this story is told through very rich and complicated allegory that is not something that I'll go into much more here. But I will say that by the end of the Bible, if you read it all the way through, one of the primary accomplishments of the cornerstone event of the Christian faith, Jesus' death and resurrection, is the redemption of the earth itself and everything in it. And when Jesus leaves his disciples, he commissions them to finish the task of restoring creation. Now, I'm not saying that if you call yourself a Christian, that means you need a garden like me. Not at all. I just think I would be leaving out a substantial element of the reason that I garden in such a way that leaves the soil and the micro and macrobiology better off than where I found it. I find a deep spiritual fulfillment in doing the work that I'm doing, at least in part, I believe, because of the inherent purpose of humanity to bring life to every corner of the world. And I also want to acknowledge that the scriptures from the Bible are far from the only religious texts and teachings that hold this perspective. I know that many belief systems hold a high view of the natural world, which I think speaks to the core inherent drive to engage with the natural world as humans. And I'll speak candidly here because I want to be transparent and say I know that not everyone is going to agree with me who's watching this. But I have to say I find it troubling that a large contingent of my Christian spiritual tradition has been captured by an odd sort of escapist theology that states that this world will one day burn and all things will be destroyed by God's furious wrath. So why take care of the planet at all? From the narrative trajectory that I read, almost the exact opposite is true. In fact, after the flood event, God says he'll never do it again. And the book ends with a future vision of all humanity living in harmony with each other and the earth on the earth. I'm done with my preaching days, so I'm just going to stop there. I don't say any of this with the intent of winning you guys over to my point of view. I think it's discouraging a little bit to hear that these issues become so political and inflaming, and I appreciate you extending me the kindness of not assuming anything more about me than what I shared here. This has been something that's been on my heart for a while, and because we've been given this increasingly robust platform, I just wanted to share it with you guys. And that is where I'll conclude this video. If you watched to the end, thank you. As always, for giving me your time. Thank you for subscribing and supporting the work that we do through this channel. We really want to help people like you find solutions to the various hurdles that gardening presents, and it's exciting seeing so much positive momentum in the direction of natural growing. If you haven't yet, please sign up for my email newsletter for weekly gardening tips and insights. Send me an email telling me what you're up to and what you're working on. I would love to connect and hear what's going on with you. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.